Hello, everybody, and a really warm welcome to another courageous conversation where we are celebrating the voices, the wisdom, and the courage of women. My name's Pollyanna Darling, and I look after community engagement for Tree Sisters and also Tree Sisters Australia. And I'm really, really excited and happy in my heart to be speaking today with Azul-Valerie Thome. Thank you so much for being with us, Azul.
Good morning from Devon.
So before we jump into some interesting conversation around grief, and thank you very much to everyone who has patiently waited while we've tried to sort out little tech issues, I'd really love to just share with you a little more about Azul. So Azul is the active visionary behind the organization SOULand. She's a designer of soulful rituals, an earth artist, a sacred activist, and a mentor devoted to restoring humanity back to a deep and honourable relationship with the earth. She shares her wisdom teachings and gatherings centered around maturing as humans, grief ritual, women's rites of passage, earth-informed art, and life-cairn dedications for honouring extinct species. Azul lives in a little wooden cabin on the edge of the wood in Devon, in England, as part of her response to her full engagement with Extinction Rebellion, deep adaptation, and the work that reconnects. So I would really love to open a conversation with you around grief, Azul, but before we go there, would you like to share with us why it is that you're a tree sister?
Yes, thank you, Pollyanna. Really lovely to meet you, by the way. And well, the first time I saw Claire, we've got a long journey back, Claire and I. So it was at Be the Change conference. The first time she got on stage and shook like a leaf and told her big vision, which sounded impossible. And I loved that immediately, that it sounded impossible. And so I've kind of followed that thread through her, and then we lived together for a while, so we got to know each other a bit. And then what I see Tree Sister as is that to plant trees and to mend sisterhood, whether we have 2 years left or 2000, it feels like a beautiful thing to do as a gift of gratitude. So I'm looking at it now as an outcome, like if we do that, we'll be better off. But actually, it just feels like a sane thing to do. And anything that brings a bit of sanity to our world, as far as I'm concerned, I feel it here. It's a beautiful thing. So Tree Sisters make a lot of sense. And I can see how it touches so many people.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Love to talk about grief for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a very alive thing for a lot of women in the Tree Sisters network because of the state of the world, the ecosystem collapse, the burning forests, everything that many Tree Sisters love appears to be dissolving in front of us. And also because my own relationship with grief is quite difficult. As much as I would like to embrace it, there's a part of me that's always, trying to keep it at arm's length. So can you share with us first how it is that you came to be doing the grief work?
So I'm going to try to weave personal and collective together. They often dance together. Grief, the sacred work of grief, let's say, is the same world than the world of soul in my experience. And I've experienced a lot of grief in my life and was pathologized for it and medicated and institutionalized. And it's not until I've come across people that had a different language for what I felt, which was around rite of passage and totally legitimate experience of losing what we love, and or having been traumatized, or I was a child in the war, and there's many things that I held in my own being, and not to experience grief in a collective kind of community almost killed me, literally. So there was something about, I remember the day where I thought, if I'm going to live, I want to die alive. And what does it take to be alive in this world where everything, we seem to lose everything? So it's a few people along the path that I have so much gratitude for, like Joanna Macy, like Mary Oliver, like Francis Weller, like Sobunfu Some, and like many, many others who were teachers to me about weaving a different kind of language for the experience of a broken heart. And when you start learning the language of soul, everything seems to have a legitimate and a more beautiful belonging. So through poetry and songs and rituals and ceremonies and land, earth connections, and talking to the ancestors, and all the things that in another world, in our other world, looks like madness. So
Yeah, all the things that seem, when you are sharing that list of things, all those things are the things that they don't only look like madness, but they seem to be missing as well.
that's right.
Yeah.
They're missed, and or even in our own circle, they seem sometimes to be brushed away as a hippie thing. Ah, that word, honestly, it's just driving me insane. Because as soon as we declared something like that, then there's no more curiosity. There's no more inquiry. You're just a bunch of hippie. Okay, fine. But it closes a door to anything living. Um, so the language of soul and of our earth seem to be through all what we just, you know, through songs and poetry and metaphor and myth and, this deep, we don't quite, we still haven't been taught how to love the dark, and how to be in relationship to falling into void, or our relationship to death is non-existence, or to, so I talked to you earlier on about these four sisters. A good time to bring them in.
Yeah.
So grief is becoming quite popular, which I'm glad and concerned as well. Because in my experience, she doesn't live alone, and she has three other sisters. I call them the four sisters. It's a long story how I came about it another time, but they exist in the forest somehow, somewhere. So grief is got a twin sister totally embedded, which is love. So our capacity to love is what grief is about. It's actually, it initiates us into our capacity to love in the mystery of losing everything and the mystery of death. And then the other two sisters are death and rebirth. And it seems like in the world, or the Western world anyway, that seems so invested in being in the summer all the time, productive, always young, always up and going. The lights are on. In London, for example, I walked around in the night. The lights are on all day, all night. There's no one in the offices. So we're very invested in this spell. There's like a spell that we need to be productive and be part of the machine. So our relationship to winter in cities doesn't exist. And
So how, you know, given that those that list of things that you were speaking of that were to do with soul, and given that we are, and we do really seem to be under a spell, what do you think is the way to break that spell and to bring those things more to life in our everyday lives?
oh, to trust our longing, our deep longing, that this secret longing, this that's the language of soul to me. That's how anima mundi, or some people really hate Latin, so sorry. It's around the Romans and what they've done and all that. I'm just learning about all this stuff. Sorry for that. The soul of the earth seems to speak through us, through our longing. And then the first threshold that seems to be right there is grief. So here we've got this longing, you know, which is the language of soul, to be in community, to live close to the land, to have elders, to have rites of passage again, to be close to the rivers, or to clean the rivers, or anything, to plant trees, to be in sisterhood. It seems like the next step is through a massive threshold of grief, or overwhelm, or feeling a lack of confidence, or mostly a lack of connection, because these longings are not meant to be happening on our own. But when you're alone in a flat somewhere, and you've got this longing, which is one of the gates of grief, the fourth one from Francis Weller, the fourth one is what we expected and did not receive. That world, that Stone Age memory, that when we were born, we're meant to be welcomed by 100 people or something, of people that knew their rivers, their trees, their mountains, their songs, their ancestors, their stories, and we are mostly born in a white room with a woman lay down trying to birth us. It's pretty horrendous, the first meeting with life. So there's that longing, which is the language of soul, and then there's the gate of grief, or a threshold through. And so this is when we need community to hold us and to thank us. That's what I changed my world as well, is when I was told that my grief was the greatest gift I could give to the world, because it was my love. So by grieving, we are giving our love, and also to the ancestors for all their efforts to bring us here. And yeah, there's a teacher of mine who died now, Soulful. She comes from the Dagara people in Burkina Faso. And she inspired the work I've done for years now. They have a ritual, a grief ritual in their village once a week. Every week. The children are there, and it doesn't need to be a big crisis. So imagine now, we need them. We certainly need them at least once a week. And because it was a soul hygiene, they knew that if we were going about with a burdened heart, we would disconnect from ourselves, from each other, from the world, from the other living world, the non-human world. And so they did that every week. And
so what did they do? I'm very curious about, because I see that there are different things available to people now in terms of grief circles, especially if you're in any kind of activist circle. And I'm curious, and I'm sure other people are curious about what exactly you do. What do you do in it if you're going to grieve with other people?
It really depends of the context, I guess. and who's around. But the simplest way is to acknowledge, first of all, that we have a very heavy heart and a broken heart with others. And you could start with inviting a few friends. And there's a beautiful ritual from the Dagara people. It's really simple. And so, first of all, we always start to create container with gratitude. So, to do a round of gratitude with others, say, what are we grateful for right now? That creates, and then to call on the allies, whoever they are, you know, your personal practice, whatever. And then you can have a big bowl of water in the middle. So you can sit in circle, have a bowl of water with stones around, and take turn, hold a stone, and tell the stone what burdens your heart. What is it that's so heavy on your heart, or whether it's despair or sorrow or anger or fear or terror or numbness. All is welcome, you know. And then you say it to the stone and you place it in the bowl. And then you go round and the next person says that. And it's so beautiful. And what it does is that at the end you can see that it's all collective. You don't know which one is your stone anymore. And what you see is a bowl of water, which is our sorrow, our tears, and the tears of our earth. And all these stones, which is community. And then you can pour the water by a tree, if you have a tree, if you're lucky to have one tree outside your house or somewhere, and tell them of your love for life and how difficult it is right now. And, you know, and the stones can go back to the river or wherever they come from. And that is a beautiful ritual to do. It's very simple. And then, you know, I offer apprenticeship to grief. And there's many other rituals that can be done. A bit more complex. But this one is like everyone's longing for another person or two or three or four to say, I'm really hurting. I'm really I feel I'm going crazy. Can we just gather together and share this heartbreak? So that's a bit, that's among humans. Otherwise, if you don't have humans, go by a river or the ocean, you know.
Or the trees.
Definitely the trees. They really love
So
it.
thank you for sharing that. That does sound very simple and very beautiful. I'm curious about why you think it is that as human beings we turn away from grief so much, you know, why we don't want to walk towards it, why it is so frightening. Like other people's grief can be frightening, our own grief can be frightening. Why do you think that is?
There's, well, a couple of things. One is grief is essentially wild. She's wild. She needs to be wild. And that, as you know, wild is quite scary. And we live in a world that has invested in controlling it all and having power over it. So to even touch on grief can be a bit scary if you haven't got a relationship to being wild or a bit of wild. Another thing is I can see people that come into my circles, they're very scared to drown in it and to be overwhelmed. And there's a lot of talks also about that it can be triggering old trauma or something. So there's two things. It's like never force people to go into kind of grief rituals. They're not ready. I think the soul of a person has a very deep wisdom about what's good for them. And the other is I've never seen someone drowning in their grief. And I've seen hundreds and hundreds of people now over the years. It's water, you know, it comes in waves. And if you're held in gratitude for your work, because this is work, to actually offer our grief. It's deep work. So what we do often is we have a ritual that has the village singing. It's like we're alive. We sing and we dance and we're joyful and we're grateful. And when you feel that you're moving into your grief, you're moving towards the grief shrine that is a few meters away. And you really go for it and you offer it to the ancestors, and you often always have someone behind you. So you don't go there alone. It isn't a solo event. And then when you come back, when that wave passed and you're like, and you're walking around with your friend, we welcome you and thank you with the bottom of our heart for your generous and courageous offering. And then when you feel that you are touched and held, you start singing the song. So you don't collapse, you're not let to collapse. You just held until you can sing the song again. And you sing the song, and then other people go. And you sing the song, and you pick up the drum, and you're alive. So it's like it's a good practice for the world we live in. So I think that's the fear of overwhelm, of drowning, of being out of control, of burdening others. I hear a lot that, oh, I'm sorry, it's taking so much time. I'm taking too much time with my grief. And when you start understanding that her grief or his grief is collective, and that her releasing of grief is the releasing of everyone's grief, that nothing is, it's like a beehive. You become a super organism. Nothing is individual. But we need to relearn. It takes time.
There's so much in what you're saying, like I'm feeling these waves of recognition in what you're saying, and then there's tears coming around the truth in what you're saying. And I think what you say about the wildness of it is very true, because I can feel that in myself, that fear of what would I do, would I run through the streets screaming, would I do something terrible, would I drive my car into a pole, or would I shave off my hair in a very strange way and then find that I couldn't do my job, like the things that might arise through the body that are wild, and how much we've lost, I suppose, our relationship to what does arise through the body, whether it's grief or love, or it seems like a lot of things we don't want to be expressing.
I'd love to say something wild, just briefly, and thank you for I can feel water moving in your body. There is something, because I think we've been away from wild so long that we seem to think that wild is to break the house down. But actually, if you look at wild, it's not like that. A wild animal doesn't break their house apart. What they do is they open their senses. It's like courting, it's like there's eros is in the room. It's very erotic to be wild. And, your eyesight gets better, your hearing, your body feels like sensuality. And, you become the forest, or you become the river, that wildness. And it saddens me how far we've come to think that wildness is to be mad almost. It got associated with being mad, but it isn't. It really isn't. What I mean wild is to be back into the web of life, which we so long for, that return home. And through grief, we really can. We do. It really happens. It seems to be mending our separation with everything that matters. So the more
Oh, I
we
love
enter, and
that.
also not to be by yourself in it. You know, my generation in France, for example, we were brought up to cry alone in our bedroom because it was wild, it was uncontrollable, it was improper, and so many of us have been brought up that way. And to break
Mm.
out, to break down that thing of calling a friend, it's very hard, you know. But calling a friend, say, I just need to share some of my grief and not be fixed, not be pathologized, not be giving advice or nothing. Just allow the waves to pass.
Yeah.
It's a kind thing to do to each other, I think. It's a kind
It's
thing to do.
my whole heart is just saying, oh yes, please. And
Oh,
I'm remembering when my favorite grandmother died, and I I spoke at her funeral, and I cried all the way through speaking at her funeral, and then we went back to her house for the wake, and it was so proper. People were drinking tea, and I felt so broken, like I was so broken apart by the whole thing. And I went up to her bedroom and I lay on her bed and cried by myself. And like, even if I think back to that, um, I can't even imagine, crying with all those people. you know, it feels like a big leap to make, like you say, from the way that we've been raised. And also such a thing that, my heart anyways would love to have.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's cruel. It's a cruel thing to be on a little girl on by yourself on your grandmother's bed crying alone. It's quite hard. It's quite brutal for the psyche. And but that longing, you know, like SOULand is about making the world of our longing. And the only
Mm,
way is to go through it, to go through the grief and then to make it happen. It's like, oh, we
yeah.
feel that longing for rituals. We feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it. And then there's a moment where there's action. There's action. And Joanna Macy offers a beautiful structure as well for grief, which is a spiral. I don't know if you know this one, but I'm sure many people know this one. And it's a spiral in 4 stages. And we start with gratitude. Then we honor our pain for the world. And then naturally what happens is we start seeing with new eyes. And then the 4th stage is we move forth. And this is deep ecology. It is what
Mm,
happens. It doesn't need to be thought through. It emerges naturally. And the more we do it, the more you trust it. You trust yourself in it.
yeah. That brings me to a question I have, which is the relationship between grief and activism, and the
Mm-hmm.
relationship between grief and action. I'd really love you to talk a little about that.
Mm. Oh, well, that's a bit what I've just mentioned. And there's a couple more things, I guess, let me give you an example what happened. So I was at the rebellion in October in London, with Extinction Rebellion, mostly around doing ceremonies. And the first ceremony we did was informed by the grief, a lot of the grief of our poverty in our relationship with the ancestors. So there is a beach in London on low tide. There's thousands of bones washed on the beach twice a day. And we went there and we rubbed the bones with oil and red ochre and sang to them and grieved. And then that day, a whale arrived in the river, a humpback whale. Then she died a few days after. We were in the middle of this really chaotic rebellion this time. And the grief was so enormous for me and then for others as we talked. The action was, we feel our grief, yes, let's go and do a ceremony. It needs to happen more and more like that now. And it wasn't planned. You know, it took 2 hours, gathered a few people. We went back on that same beach at low tide and did a ceremony and offered our grief to the whale and how sorry we were because they are dead because of us. You know, that one was dead because she was starved, disorientated, and then was hit by a boat. And it's that kind of practice of being tempered by grief somehow, of yes, we feel it, it breaks our heart, and we keep walking and we do a ceremony because that's the right thing to do. It's our duty of care somehow to lean into grief, actually, to lean into our love. And all, you know, it can get a bit exhausting. Of course it does. And sometimes we need to stop doing it for a while. But there is that action of that grief is informative in a way. Grief is, oh, that's what I love. I love whales. I love them. Okay, what else can I do? But offer at least a ceremony. And then we were 25, 30 people. And very quickly we did a circle of bones again. We rubbed the bones. We sang to the river. We sang. We tried to remember what a whale sounds like. And sang, you know, and a lot of tears came. And then the joy that came naturally after. And we went for a hot chocolate. And there was so much vitality in the cafe. Everyone's face was beaming with life because we had done something. So action comes when we lean into grief. It does. It naturally does.
Yeah, it's making me feel so powerfully, yeah, that the expression of the grief allows the life force to be flowing, where when we're holding it, that nothing flows.
You know, Martin Prechtel said a sentence which is really revealing. He said, illnesses are fossilized tears. And that's what you're saying, you know, that's it.
Yeah.
And my mother died. My grandmother died of lung cancer, and my mother died of lung disease, both related to unexpressed grief. And you could see it in people when something has been frozen in time. And there's a lot of ancestral grief as well, you know, things that we're born with. And that takes a lot of time, time, I don't know, but definitely commitment. And to move from feeling victimized about what we've inherited to actually going, okay, it's my job. It's my job to heal this, so I'm going to do it. And for the children, you have children, I have a son, you know, it's like, it motivates. Even if women don't have children, it's for the children. For the children.
Yeah. Of all the species.
Of all the species.
Yeah, that makes me, or when people say the children, it always makes me think now of Mac McCartney and his children's fire that he talks about, that, you know, that when we talk about the children, it is the children of every species. Yeah. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I'd really like to explore something else with you before we get there. So I was investigating on your website and reading about the different gates of grief, and you talk about the third great gate of grief as being the sorrows of the world, and that gate is bound up with our gratitude and also with all creation and belonging. And I think that gate of the sorrows of the world seems to be very, very alive. It feels alive for me. It's very alive in the Tree Sisters Network. It's very alive in Extinction Rebellion. You know, it's just so present. And I'd really love to know how we go about finding gratitude in our grief, and how do we turn ourselves towards that, when there are other options like rage and bitterness and numbness, those other options are sort of floating there. How do we bring ourselves towards gratitude and belonging in the sorrows of the world?
There's a lot. There's a lot in what you say. The first thing I would like to say is really honor Francis Weller for his amazing work of the 5 gates of grief. And what I've done for my masters, he was my mentor, is I took them with his mentoring. I wanted to take them beyond what he was offering. And what I've been working on the last few years is exploring whether these 5 gates of grief could lead us and take us to 5 gates of deep belonging. So that's what I'm working with apprentices at the moment. And so what I identified is this seems like all the 5 gates of grief have something in common that is about separation. We start from a place of separation, whether separation with death, for the first gate, separation with our adulthood and to separation to part of us, separation with the living world. We still talk about the living world as not being us all the time. We do. Fourth gate of grief is, a separation with our deep time memory, Stone Age people, like way back. And the 5th gate is our separation with our ancestors. So all the 5 gates of grief is to do with separation. And then by going through the gates of grief and really allowing yourself to be touched and moved and composted, I call them grief composting circles, there is a place there. There is a place that is a place of deep belonging. And my work with extinction, not Extinction Rebellion, but extinction, before Extinction Rebellion, of creating life cairn for extinct species. We've done one here in Totnes. I thought I was breaking. At one point, I felt my bones were breaking. That's all I could keep saying, because it was so immense to put my head on my pillow every night thinking there's 200 species gone. 200 more. And not only that, but of species I don't know anything about. I don't know their names. Only have this very sterile number, 200. Anyhow, working with it, there was a point where I touched deep belonging that is beyond death, beyond extinction. There is, but it mustn't be, and I say mustn't be a spiritual bypass. This is different, because I can hear other things going, well, anyway, everything is, illusion, and there is another. There's a way that keeps us in love. But you're talking about gratitude. They seem to exist at both ends. Is that we always start with gratitude. We don't go through grief before naming what we're grateful for first. However heartbroken we are, it's a really important thing to do. It's really important to remember that, whatever setup you're going to create. And then at the end, I often invite people to say what resources them. And then we go to gratitude again. Whether it's, one tree that we love outside, or our children, of course, or that river, or my grandmother, or, So we start and end with gratitude. It's essential. And for the 3rd gate of grief, there is a truth. It's a truth that is, it's like that we have an immutable bond with the living world. And I want to say, and I say it a lot, but I really want to say it again because it touches me, and is that they don't wish for us to go, these other beings. And they long for our return. I really sense that. They long for us to return to the web of life. So as far as they are concerned, I have no proofs. I don't have any parable, whatever. Sorry, scientist. But um, they long for our return. There is no wish for the rest of life for us to be eliminated as human because life would be better off without us. I don't, I don't, I don't feel this to be true. So essentially, we belong already. It's just there's some spell of amnesia. Like somehow something happened. I have no idea. There's loads of theories about what happened. Somehow we experience ourselves as separated. And this homecoming, I trust, comes through sacred work of grief. It is a very beautiful way. Collective grief. I need to keep repeating that. And I know it brings a lot of grief when I say community, because that's the fourth gate, grief, which is a lot of people don't have community. And that can be a source of grief. And eventually, when we feel it enough, that grief, a source of information about what is it that we're here to do. And your thing might be to really create a community. Does it make any sense what I've said? I've just kind of blubbered.
Yes, there's so much. There's so much. There's so much in what you're saying.
I told you I can't just now stop thinking.
But I think the thing that stood out for me the most is when you were talking about gratitude. Is it feels like gratitude and grief are you can't separate them. You know, they in the same way that if all my life I've thought about the people I love the most, and right next to that is what if I lose them, next to, always. And the deeper I feel that love and gratefulness for something in my life, the stronger that sensation is of like, what if I lose it, and but it's very beautiful for me to feel the gratitude and the grief together like that, yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
So I have a question from the lovely Jenny, who is a Tree Sisters team member who is on a menopause sabbatical at the moment, and she really wanted yeah, Jenny, hi if you're watching. She really wanted to know how we can support each other in our grief as Tree Sisters, as women, as people in community. How can we support each other?
So I guess I did talk about it already a little bit when that ritual with the bowl of water and stones, to bring our humanity to each other and say, this is hard. You find it hard. Yes, mostly is yes. Shall we gather? Now you also have the groves, don't you, in Tree Sisters?
Yeah.
So anything that's already created within the Tree Sisters would be a beautiful place already. The structures is there to check in with each other. Just check it out to see if anyone else is feeling that heavy burden, or nothing. Numbness is so part of grief. It's also welcome. And to do a simple ritual, like I've said, that would be a beautiful thing. I've done some online, and I'm designing a new one. And even online seems to be really beautiful. You just need a structure, simple structure of gratitude, a sharing of grief, and ending with resources and gratitude. And then to check in on each other.
Yeah.
Because some people are so far away from each other. the online seems to work. I was a bit reticent, but actually it does work. It does.
It's amazing what works online. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
totally.
Yeah.
Like, wow. Yeah, to acknowledge it and to ask support from all the teachers and everyone that has brought the sacred work of grief, all the ancestors that have survived so much ordeal to bring life. I mean, they know about, we're alive thanks to their courage and generosity and whatever they've been through. Unbelievable what they've been through. Make beauty. It's really good as well. To make a lot of beauty.
Thank you. So for we've just released in Tree Sisters a little bit of information about what we're doing next year on International Women's Day, and we're really lucky and thrilled that Azul is actually helping us with our International Women's Day activity for next year in March, and it's called Weaving Women Back into Matter, and I'd really love you to share a little about that project.
Very excited. I'm so excited about this. I can hardly stay sitting. So it's for the 8th of March. We're going to invite the women in the groves to learn 2 ways of weaving and to have a sort of communion between trees and women and threads, and to weave women back into matter. And the word matter, if you look at the etymology, comes from mater and mother and our earth, and to be made to come back into our body and to come back into the body of this earth that so longs for us to come back. And through making and through using our hands, through being together as women, through being with trees and the other beings, through being with the roots under our bums and the mycelium that connects and communicates and all this, we're gonna learn to weave. Sometimes I call them womb belts, if women want to make that, and then we wear them around our hips and in sisterhood. But they don't have to be womb belts. They can be also belts that we can offer to trees, we can offer to each other. And the wildest longing I have about this is to create with one another a belt long enough that we could go around the earth once. And I think I calculated that we needed 3 million women to weave to weave a 2-meter belt. I thought that's not that many.
Not that many.
I mean, well, how many are there? Like 3.5 billion women or something. So surely 3 million is not too much.
We've come back around to how we started, where you said you saw Claire on stage talking about this vision, which seemed impossible, and we're back. And here is this vision, really alive. So there's no reason why we can't get 3 million women.
Yeah, 6,000 kilometers or something. I think that the hips of our earth. What a beautiful thought. She must be really delighted to hear this, Mama. She must be delighted. Yes, so this is happening, and there'll be films to show a couple of ways of how to do it, and question and answer, and yeah, it's going to be beautiful. I think it's already started. The Nest has a group. An email has been sent, and yes, but all the practicals start in January, at the end of January.
Yeah.
So this is very exciting.
It's very exciting, and if you're watching and you would like to participate, do come into our Nest community, which is our online Tree Sisters community that's got over 3,500 people in it. And if you go to treesisters-nest.org, you can join the Nest, and there's a group in there for International Women's Day. That would be really wonderful. So thank you so much, Azul. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. I feel like my whole body's gone on this big journey through everything that you've been saying, and yeah, I feel very touched by the things that you've shared and the way that you share them. So thank you so much for such a lovely, soulful conversation. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing the International Women's Day activity here in Australia, and I hope lots of other Australian Tree Sisters will join in with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, for anyone who's watching, if you have enjoyed this conversation and you would like to support Tree Sisters to fund tree planting in the tropics and make it normal for us to be giving back to nature, please do come and join us at treesisters.org, and you can find out all about our projects and donate for the trees if you wish. That would be really wonderful. So thank you again, Azul, for being with us, and yeah, have a really beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you, Poliana. My heart is smiling. And yeah, if you want to stay in touch, anyone, just I have a website. It's SOULand, 1L, soulland.org, and we can stay in conversation. A beautiful day.
Thank you. Bye bye, everyone. Yeah, bye.